We've talked about when we launched Crashlands, we had 300 items in our workflow of like, these are things that have to go into the game.
Yep.
But, you know, once we had $500 left in the bank, we were like, I guess not.
Butterscotch.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 199 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, and I'm the rumpus wrangler.
I'm Sam, and I'm the art slanger.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and...
Slanger?
Slanger? Oh, I feel bad about that now. I'm sorry, Art.
You got to sling it.
Sling it. Don't slang it. That's not a good one.
Also, here we talk about the games industry as well. Today is April 16th.
Oh, yeah.
2019.
Make sure you pay taxes if you're in the States.
Pay those taxes.
Pay
Speaking of
those
taxes, we're going to be talking about adult things on this show. So if you're a kid and you don't like taxes or swears, then you get on out of here.
By the way, today is not actually the 19th, though, right?
I think
that tax 15th?
15th is
15th is tax.
Today's 15th.
Oh.
Yeah.
Better.
I mean, I already paid it.
Oh, okay.
I was like, I paid it yesterday, but I thought the 19th was when taxes were
No,
due.
it's always the 15th.
It's always 15th.
Oh, shit.
That's how I used to think.
Because it's halfway through April. I don't know why
I always thought Thanksgiving was the 25th of November because it just seemed like it was.
Is it not?
No, it's the third Thursday.
I've come to learn that I don't know.
It's always a Thursday.
So it's wiggling all over the place.
I think the only days that I know are Christmas and tax day. And anytime somebody's like, oh yeah, it's coming up on Labor Day weekend, I'm like, is that the one in
Is that the spring or the fall?
August?
because there's Memorial Day.
Yeah.
Memorial Day, Veterans Day,
Labor-
and Labor Day.
Labor Day.
And President's Day.
The problem is like they don't have traditions other than you just aren't at work.
Yeah.
Right. And so like there's no, oh yeah, you guys coming to like the Labor Day
Right. It doesn't like stick in the mind.
thing that happens every year in the spring or fall or
The
whenever.
Labor Day Labor Party. I assume Labor Day parties should all be about you go out and doing manual labor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would be fucking dope if Labor Day was like, today's the day where we do like a full-on 24-hour workday jam session
Yeah.
because it's Labor Day. Like we gotta
Celebrate
doing work.
celebrate just
Mhm.
working hard.
Go clean up the street.
It is weird that our celebration of labor is then not working. I don't quite.
We're like, we did it, guys. We worked.
We're done.
Let's take a break.
Yeah,
Take a little
fine.
nap.
Whatever.
Yeah. So I hope everybody got their taxes paid because today is the day where you are gonna have a different amount of money than you thought.
Yes.
Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's
less.
less, but it's never going to be what you thought you had.
Yeah.
And that's the important
It's a
thing.
surprise.
Now, if you ended up with more money than you were expecting, don't just go spend that. That's not free money. That's just money that the government borrowed for a while.
Mhm.
You know, use it responsibly.
Yeah.
The government borrowed that money, then they loaned it to somebody else, got some interest on it, and then gave it back to you.
The student loans actually probably is where, most of it's gone. So it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Not paying them back. But
Yeah.
making them more expensive.
Just doing something bad to them, probably. Also, we would like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can go on over there and do that, and we'll grab that money. All right, let's talk about Sam. You
Yes.
got a word.
I got a word that I learned.
Word you
that I thought was
learned.
important to pass on to our listeners. So I have this problem, which is I mumble a lot, as you know.
I have noticed.
Some of our listeners have said I sound like I'm slightly drunk at times.
Mm-hmm.
Also true.
Yep.
So my wife cannot sometimes understand what it is that I am saying. So she will guess whatever she wants about what the
And
sentence
it
is.
really is whatever she wants.
But that's the thing. So she's one of the
Just
few
free of
people I've met.
context.
Yes,
Just no.
applies zero context to the scenario. So it'll just be just random slight homonyms with whatever it was I was
So
saying.
maybe she'd be like, "Hey, do you want to I'm making some crackers. You want some?"
And I'll be
She'd
like,
be like,
"Yeah."
and she'd be like, "Papyrus."
Yes, exactly.
And you're like,
It's
"That's not."
And this actually happens all the time. So I learned a word.
I made
for
that
this.
scenario up, by the way. That wasn't a real one.
It's
but
about
pretty
accurate.
close.
So I found this word the other day when I was on the thesaurus.com looking for another word for something in the game. And the description was apparently a poet coined it back like 100 years ago because they heard a poem, like a childhood poem, that they always thought ended with the phrase, and Lady Mondegreen.
And Lady Mondegreen.
When actually,
Just ended with that.
That's-
that was like the last.
Ended with and Lady Mondegreen. Okay, sure.
When in reality it was, and laid him on the green.
That probably made more sense in context.
Mhm. So the word is Mondegreen. When someone hears you and then repeats something back that is completely wrong.
It has no basis in the context
Yes.
of the
So
moment.
now I just call my wife Mondegreen whenever this happens. It's working out really good because it sort of, before I just had to be like, why? Can't you understand?
Sometimes you need a name for something.
Exactly.
And
I feel so much better about
then
it.
it's explained.
Mm-hmm.
But no part of your strategy has been just as mumble-less.
I have tried to mumble less, but
Okay.
it's inherent in my being.
Well, no, it's
It's
one
hard
thing
to
I've
unplug.
learned about Sam's mumbling is that it's not about clarity. It only occurs when he's responding to something that he doesn't think matters that much. So it's often an affirmation. So I'll be like, "What do you think about this?" Or like, "Should I do this?" And he'll be like, which means
assume it doesn't matter what he said because it's fine.
Yeah, it could
'Cause he
mean
doesn't
like
care.
right. It could mean like, yes, I think you should do that, but it probably doesn't matter. So you should just do whatever you want. Is the full sentence?
It
that
might
he
also
said.
mean no, but it also doesn't really matter that much.
Right.
Mm.
So I've taken it to mean that when a mumble comes like in response, really it's just like a meh,
You just deal with it.
yeah, it's fine.
maybe I'm sort of mentally detached at the time too, because frequently you ask me stuff and I'm actually in the middle of something, and I'll just be like, and then carry on. You know,
Because it's just not. It doesn't matter that much right now.
just make an audible noise.
Yeah. So it's just like a free. Because if you're, Sam, you're a very gregarious vocal person.
That's true. I do talk.
And so when you do care about something, the words do come out.
That's true.
So I think it's just
Relative clarity.
it's more, it's like a Caro meter, a very sort of audible one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The chirometer.
Mondegreen.
Mondegreen.
Take that home.
So you can yell that at people when they mishear you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Also, Sam, you were on a podcast.
Oh yeah. Airtable. So Airtable contacted us, surprise, and they said, "Hey, we've got this podcast. Would you guys want to be on it?" And we were like, "No." But about a month went by, and then
We were like,
called
yeah.
back, and I was like, "Yeah, actually, we got some time," because basically that was
they
right
said-
before the alpha when they sent us a note.
So they said, "You want to be on the podcast?" And you're like, "Nah."
Yeah, I emailed in mumble form. And I basically said like, "Hey, we're like going into this alpha. We have a lot of stuff going on, so I don't really have time for it." And then we did, and so I hopped onto it last week. Was it last week? 2 weeks ago?
I think it was just a few days
We're
ago.
in the
probably.
time warp. I don't know. But anyways, it came out on Monday, saying that in the past tense. Today is Monday as far as we're recording. This podcast comes out on Wednesday, so it came out already.
It came out on April 16th.
There you go. And basically what it was I got to sit down with one of the community organizers there, Zoe, who's been doing their podcast stuff. And we talked about how we actually used Airtable in the context of Levelhead. So the podcast is all about Airtable, of course. But I got to show off Levelhead and talk a little bit more about how we think through some of these design problems and stuff like that. So I showed them how we'd initially used Airtable to set up the level structure for the game, because we didn't actually have the tooling inside of the game when we started building all levels. And so it was a sort of big, crazy, database spreadsheet thing. So it was a lot of fun, and you guys can check it out. We'll put it in the show notes.
Did
Yeah.
you also, while you were talking, did you ask them how are they going to compete with this upstart Notion that basically just also is Airtable?
I didn't mention Notion.
Okay.
It's probably a sore point for that.
Yeah, I don't want to talk to them about it. But I did tell them about the Whisper. So
Yeah.
So then, we exchanged whispers towards the end.
Which, for those who have not listened to that episode of the podcast, 60 episodes ago?
We
or
did it
something?
there were like probably
It was
there were a
actually
lot of
sequence.
episodes.
But it was when we first discovered Airtable, because it was like magic. And then so as we were talking about it, we would just start going, Airtable.
I hate to break it to you. It was probably more like 100 episodes.
Was it really?
Yeah.
There's no way. Was it? Actually, yeah, it might have been.
Oh, well,
I know
more than a year.
We were using Airtable when we were developing
But a year is
Scuffle
50
Buddies.
episodes.
Yeah, and it's been 2
Oh
years.
shit, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I
So
think
been
it's
a
been
while.
about 2
Whoa.
years.
This is episode 199 after all.
That's a lot.
Which is
We're
damn,
one away.
damn close to
from-
200.
And it's Prime.
Is it?
I saw it in the show notes
Okay.
Oh.
from over here.
Well, how did
I
you
don't know how you did
I
this.
used your glasses.
Well, I gotta get LASIK.
Yeah, man.
People keep reading my stuff through my glasses. affected.
It's a privacy issue, really.
It's a privacy. Glasses are a real privacy concern.
They are.
All right, let's talk about Levelhead.
yeah.
When's it coming out?
Soon.
April.
It's coming out April soon.
So we're recording this on the 15th, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what we do know is that it's not going to launch by the time this episode airs.
Otherwise, we
That's
would
true.
just tell you.
Those would have been like, it's out now,
Mhm.
but it's not out now.
But it is
And
out.
it won't be out now either. Now
No.
being the time the
The day
episode
of
comes
the
out.
podcast.
Correct.
Mhm.
So that means there's 13 days left.
Mhm.
Okay.
But it'll be out.
So every
Very
day,
soon.
the likelihood increases that it's going to come out.
Mhm.
Yeah. Until it does come out, and then it decreases in all subsequent
Then
days.
it decreases, some would say sharply.
Very sharply.
Uh,
It drops basically to zero immediately
Mhm.
afterwards.
yeah. So let's just talk about how this is going, because we're ramping up.
We're in the middle of it.
We're leading toward a launch. Mm-hmm. What's that like?
Yeah, people have noticed that over the last week, like our Steam page got updated. Some things happened in the Discord. Like things have been, everything's coming online.
You see these little tendrils of activity sort of springing out.
Yeah. So a big part of the pre-launch sequence as a game dev is basically looking through all the places where players can talk to you about stuff and trying to make it so that they can kind of funnel that energy in an appropriate way, so that once the launch actually happens, that your team isn't crushed and bewildered at the same time by
crush wildered.
You want to be crush wildered or
wilder crushed.
That's good. Yeah. You want to be wilder crushed. Right. So basically what we've done then is we went to the Steam forums and completely stole the structure from Dead Cell's Steam forums because it looks real good and just
borrowed.
We'll give it back.
Took
later.
inspiration
and then added stuff like here's how you get to the feedback, the patch notes, all this other stuff, and came up with plans for how we're going to handle all this. And so the interesting note about it is it's fun when it's all done, because it's kind of like putting together a little house, you kind of get it all set up.
But this is nice and organized and clean.
Yeah, but the moment to moment is like, it's like wiggling chairs around the dining room sort of a situation. Like it's not big movements by any stretch. And so every so often something nice and big will happen. So we got our new wallpaper and our new box art from David Kaeg. And so David Kaeg's done some work for Blizzard as well. He's a freelancer. He does fantastic stuff. And so he did the new Levelhead box art for us.
It was very colorful.
So fun. And he just like knocked it out of the park. I actually toned the color down in the background because it was competing too much with the characters. But he did such a good job with it. It's so fun. And so we put them up on the Reddit, and we sent out a ballyhoo this past weekend to everybody with both some songs from the OST and the box art. And so it's just sort of like the pieces are finally starting to come into place. But on the dev side, it's super interesting because over here we've been just like it's sort of trying to clear all the loose ends as rapidly as possible.
And by all, we mean a small subset.
As many of them that matter the most.
Yeah. Every end is loose right now. It's been stressful.
Yeah.
In the sense that there's a handful of things that definitely need to happen. And so these are security concerns. These are sort of like final bug fixes and things like that. Doing a lot of testing and all that stuff. But I think the weird part about it is it's a ton of work that is essentially like risk management.
Yes.
It's work that's not like when we do it and we deploy that patch, people who see that patch aren't going to be like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I love the fact that this thing is less hackable or whatever. Like,
well, the reality is it's more of the stuff that keeps us safe and sane in a post-launch world, right?
Yeah. It's what allows us to actually develop the new features later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we'll have the time to do it.
So from a game development standpoint, it's the kind of stuff that's it's not as satisfying to work on because you know that it's not actually for the players, it's for us. Yeah. And so when we
it is for both, but it's that invisible part, right? Yeah. Because the fact is
it's better for them to have a game that's secure and stable.
Yeah. Well, because the consequences to a player of having that not been true is that the leaderboards are hacked immediately instead of after a few days, which, that's probably right. So if we're being honest.
Just give it a couple of days of
breathing days, right? Yeah. But it's that changing the user experience because we're controlling for these other kinds of variables that can happen. But now it's just a piece that players, they don't experience the other side of. They don't experience having had, a frame rate that drops below 30 because you did these optimizations and stuff. And they don't experience as much hacked content, right? Because we added in these features that make it harder to do that. And so the end result is just that they get the game in the way that they think it should be and that we think it should be, which doesn't feel like a feature, doesn't feel like.
Yeah. Well, that's the.
You have to do a lot of work actually to just secure the thing in the way you want it to be, rather than just like you build it and then you sort of have to like build the display case.
Yeah. Well, we've seen a lot of people making comments about. So when we did our alpha, whatever that was, a month ago or something.
Yeah.
So there are people who were in the alpha who were then like getting ready for the game to come out, and they're like, I can't wait to see all the new stuff that's in there, right? And we keep have to be like, well, I mean, there's not that much new stuff. It's mostly just making it all work.
Well, and even things like localization. We only had English during the alpha, and then since then we now have 9 languages.
Yeah. 8 additional languages on top.
And it's not fully localized. It's not totally finished, and that's always going to be an ongoing process because every new thing we add to the game creates like at least a word. Somewhere that we have to show to people to explain what the thing is. So localization is always sort of like an ongoing concern. But again, it's one of those things where, you know, if you spoke English, you were in the alpha.
Yeah.
And if you speak other languages, you weren't in the alpha, right? So like it's not
Probably,
a new
yeah.
feature for you because now the game just like is in French.
Yeah, but without it, then now all these other people wouldn't be able to play the game in their native
It's
language.
yeah. So again, it's that like it's that weird area between like it makes it so that the game is more enjoyable and more accessible to people, and it's less hackable and more stable, etc. But it's those aren't the kinds of things that players directly get excited about because they're kind of those invisible things.
Yeah.
You know?
But the nice thing is that, as we're saying, it clears the runway because we get all that stuff kind of taken care of, so we're ready for launch.
Because our goal is still to be able to move fast.
Yeah, post-launch we can still move fast and add content. Yeah. And of course, every piece of content we add also has to have all these little like shoring up mechanisms.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting because when I used to think about localization from a player perspective, it didn't ever seem like that big of a deal because it was like, I always thought about like a book, right? You just translate it,
swap the words out.
But as we've gone through the process with Crashlands and then now again with Levelhead, I mean, it's been a full-time gig for sure. And then Sampy has been roped in as far as doing some of the business stuff, and then Seth's been involved also because you actually have to build all this tech into the game.
Well, it's even stuff that is really not obvious, like the fact that it's actually surprisingly hard to display Chinese characters and say like Russian characters on the screen at the same time. Like it's surprisingly
why would
hard
that be
to-
hard?
Why
They're
would that
just
be hard?
characters.
They're just characters. Well, it's because you need to make sure you have a font for each one that displays correctly. You need to make sure that you're now detecting which of those things you're supposed to that the word is in, so you actually know that this is in Russian. So you grab a font that has Russian characters in it or whatever. And now what happens if you mix Russian characters with Chinese characters in the same word?
Well, and this reminds me of like when I first started programming games, and it took me a week to figure out how to not have the character fall through the ground.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like standing on the ground just kind of seems like a given, you know? And like you don't really, when you play a game, you don't really think about like, how is this happening?
Yep.
And so when you see text in a game, again, you just take it for granted.
Yeah.
But you don't think like, where's that coming from? How is that letter in that word? Like where is that, and how am I seeing
Well, especially
it?
because modern software that users are normally interacting with that isn't games, but even some game engines has handled the whole like font and character problem so beautifully because they've had to because of the fact that software
having
is global.
words is a nice thing.
It's a global thing. That it's all feels very seamless. Like when you're looking at something on your computer screen, if you like open up, Word or something, right? What you don't know is actually happening in the background is that there are fallback fonts where the operating system, when it finds a character that's not in the font that you've chosen, it's like, oh, I know that that's not in there. And it goes to some other font and it grabs that character. Like that's all happening
sometimes you
behind
see
the scenes.
what's called tofu, which is those rectangles.
Yeah.
If you're writing text on your screen, you see a rectangle.
Even
it's
your
'cause
fallbacks don't have.
Yeah.
No one knows what that
or
is.
your system doesn't have fallbacks, which is basically the case. Like if you're doing a thing largely from scratch, like we are with making a game, then when it comes to fonts, then there's no like automated fallback system. And so now all of a sudden we have to figure out, okay, what do we do? Do we force it so that you can only put in things that are only in one language guaranteed so that we just know what it is and can display the right font? Do we develop a fallback system? Like what do we do? It's surprisingly stupidly complicated.
Yeah. So this week has been, or this past couple of weeks has been just sort of, all that still, just more of that. We sort of gear up for it. And it's been really good, but I think, I don't know about you guys, but I'm excited to
get back onto the gameplay features wagon, start thinking about that. So let's just talk
these are
about
just other quality of life features. So
even like interface updates and
because even right now, because we have the whole share codes thing, right, that people use to share levels with each other. And one of the things that we really wanted to make sure we had done, which I don't know if we will or not, was the ability to share those just using a web link, right? And it's one of those things that's like doesn't impact the game at all, but it just seems like such a nice little feature to have that it might not have it for launch, but we'll get it in soon after, and even that like feels really good compared to just like, do the fonts work?
Can I still read the text? Yeah.
I can tell you guys what I'm most excited about though, which is the fact that for all of our other games we fully launched them, right? So it was like
they just went from
done.
0 to 60.
Yeah. And so we weren't able to. I wish. The really nice thing to me about early access is that when people get mad or complain about something, then we can fix it
Yeah, it's part of the whole
And
experience.
it's part of the known experience. And then that's also like a much happier experience. Like if a player is like, oh, there's not like this thing doesn't exist. And then you make it exist.
And we're like, yeah, we'll put that in our list. And they're like, oh, great, thanks.
That's like so much more exciting than if the game just launched with it.
But there is the counter to that, which is now because there's an expectation that players that their ideas can become a piece of the game. And
careful.
Then you got to be careful because there are no two players that have the same belief about how the thing should work, and often they're contradictory. And then
they're always contradictory.
And a large fraction of the time, they're contradictory to what we want. And in particular, because
there's somehow 3 opposing views for every idea.
Well, and what we've noticed from just in general, unless you take an entire like holistic view of a project, like a game or whatever, when you're trying to provide suggestions for it, your suggestions always are too narrowly
they're very local
scoped. They're very local, and you don't actually fully think through the consequences on the rest of the system. And so that's going to be the biggest, I think, frustration on our side is like seeing all these like ideas that people really, really want that are actually cool. It's just that they literally can't work. They literally cannot.
And I think the other interesting thing is there's this absence blindness thing, which is like players are generally going to give you feedback about what is there.
Yep.
And as a developer, it's your job to add things, come up with things that the players wouldn't have even imagined and use that to blow up the game even more, right?
Yeah. And so if you spend all of your time working on like tinkering with the things that players give you feedback about, then that means you're not going to add all the really cool new stuff that they couldn't even imagine.
So we need to be very diligent and careful, after the launch and figure out like we need a plan basically of how much time we're going to spend on each, content patch and stuff with new features versus taking player suggestions and that kind of stuff.
The truth is, I think it's something we're just going to kind of be figuring out. We got a rough idea of how this is going to work, but you just need enough of a plan to meet your day, and then it's going to go sideways, and you got to sort of replan.
Yeah. So the plan will only live long enough. Yeah, the plan will only live long enough until the day after our early access launch, I think. And then we'll
probably the day of,
or the day of.
We'll press publish. We'll be like, well, there goes everything. Okay, so then what about content updates? We'll talk about like what are we thinking in terms of what matters, what doesn't matter? Because there's a big article that came out about Apex Legends. It was in Polygon, I think it was. They were talking about how Apex Legends has essentially collapsed, or it is in the process of collapsing, and the user base is kind of like funneling out and going back to Fortnite. Or
now it still has like 1 billion people playing it.
It's only got 1 billion.
It's by comparison, right?
So only about 1/7 of the world's population is playing this
It is
game.
one of those funny things too. So whenever we look at these articles about these games declining, these are really popular games. If you look at the curve, like it's like half or whatever. But then you look at those absolute numbers, still
tremendous.
It's like enormous.
It's like 20 times the size of our home state.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting question about like cadence of content updates, and we still don't know, and we'll have to just try some stuff. But we were reading articles from like back in the Team Fortress 2 days where Valve was doing like weekly content patches. They would add some new thing every week and like do some balance changes and stuff. And it turned out that was too fast, and players kind of like stopped caring about the content patches.
Rather, what it did was it only reinvited the current player base was sort of what the issue was.
Well, and also it becomes expected and it's no longer news.
Yes.
Right. So
and it also makes the game unstable, right? Because now you don't get to just like sit with the game as it is for a while and experience it as it is. Like all of a sudden it's changed again. It's changed again. It's changed again.
Yeah. So there's this kind of theory that, you need this period of stability with then injections of chaos and new interesting things. And then you've got games like Fortnite where every week they've got some new thing coming out. I think every 2 weeks. Something like that.
Yeah, it's fast.
So maybe like a new gun or some new skins or something like that. So,
but it's not a big change, and it's rarely a fundamental change to the game, right? It's just like adding a little bit here and there.
Yeah, and then you've got things like World of Warcraft, where I think in the last expansion, every 11 weeks, every 77 days, they'd have a huge content patch of like an entirely new raid tier, new dungeons, and class rebalances, and new items and stuff like that.
Yeah, so the game is stable for basically like 2.5 months in a certain state, and then suddenly it changes a whole bunch in one go.
So there's a lot of different philosophies. So it looks like what's happening with this Apex Legends situation is that players were kind of like coming there from Fortnite, essentially.
Because it was something new,
It's something new, and also Fortnite is suffering from that, like, people like it, so now people hate it. Thing.
It's been around long enough.
It's been around long enough that people just get tired of hearing about the same thing And so when something becomes popular, it then immediately becomes unpopular with a certain segment of the
But this is
population.
also why Epic Games is in a really good job of putting out these updates that do make changes, and doing some pretty weird stuff. Like I just saw recently, they added a volcano to the map, one time, and they always give you these
crazy
hints.
things.
Yeah, they give you these hints about things, and it's all these one-off events, right? So then after a while, then there was like a whole Flora's lava thing, which either happened or was expected to happen. I don't keep enough up to date with
Like
it.
maybe like lava keeps rising.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
something.
So they keep on taking these things that only last, and even like the whole Thanos thing. Remember that shit?
Yeah.
A year ago, whenever that was.
Like for a couple weeks.
Yeah, when you could get the gauntlet and then
you
become
just-
Thanos, right? And that never happened again. That was just so. I think they did a really good job.
What keeps it interesting where you want to always be playing because you don't want to miss whatever weird thing is happening.
Yeah. Which is actually, that's an interesting strategy that's different than the ones you were talking about like the cadence stuff, because all those other ones are basically releasing stuff that keeps on adding to the game, right?
Right.
And some of what games like Fortnite and other sort of event driven game designers will do is they'll add time sensitive content that comes in and goes away and whatever.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different strategies. And with the Apex Legends thing, I think they have this problem where they're releasing stuff very slowly. And they made an announcement saying like, our intent is to deliver content at a more deliberate and slow pace so that people don't have to constantly relearn the game and so that we can ensure stability. The problem is that like apparently their content updates are still really meager they're buggy and they're not very big. And so people still don't have to relearn the game when a content patch drops, but also there's just not a lot to talk about or experience. So there's definitely a line to walk. And also I think their other problem is that every good thing that they did, Fortnite just took it within 2 weeks.
within a month for every single one of those.
So they had that ping system where you had
like point at a
yeah,
thing.
you could point at anything, and then you had a bunch of different voice commands that you could just issue to the game, and your character would announce that you're like, I'm gonna go here, or like cover me, I'm traveling here,
Yeah,
go
like
here.
put it on a map for your buddies.
Yeah,
or
it would put a
something.
little waypoint out in the world, and it was it was very useful kind of a thing. And so I think within 2 weeks, Fortnite just had that as well.
Well, yeah, they have a huge advantage with how fast their development cycle is.
Yeah. It's all about that DevOps.
Yep.
It is,
The
honestly.
faster you can. So in DevOps, they talk about the idea of a cycle time, and that your goal is to always reduce your cycle time. The cycle time is the time it takes from an idea to go
delivery.
to become to deliver value to your customer.
Which in the case of DevOps means actually being fully tested and everything else. Right?
Fully
so
deployed.
It's like,
So from somebody being like, wouldn't it be cool if bleh?
And now
then
the art exists, the
how
code
long
exists,
is
it's
it?
been tested internally, it's been tested externally, and then it gets deployed in some patch.
And so for a AAA game, 2 weeks
It's
of
very
a cycle
fast.
time is unheard of.
Yeah.
Like especially in the industry where all you hear about is crunch and missing deadlines, and you got your Fallout 76s where like game is developed forever and then it gets published and it's just completely broken. So I think that alone is such a crazy strategy. Like it's crazy in terms of how good it is relative to what everybody else is.
well, I think that's the interesting thing about it is you look at what that means for Fortnite, like what that cycle time means to them.
How do you beat them?
How do you beat them?
Any new game that comes out is like we're the next battle royale. Here's our interesting feature.
Well,
Fortnite
it's a lot like Steam, right? It's like Steam historically has not tried to compete with the startups in any other startup stores in any way, because it's so far ahead that it doesn't need to. But then as soon as every once in a while it does feel like it needs to. It's like back when Discord was getting ready to launch its store, then Steam was like, oh, by the way, we updated our chat client, and now it just looks like Discord, right? So Steam also has this where they have that in the same way that Fortnite has that inbuilt advantage where their audience is the entire audience right now. They have a monopoly on that genre. In the case of Fortnite, it's a game type. In the case of Steam, it's a way of getting games, right? But they have a monopoly on it. They have all the users. And so someone who's come in and compete in that space, they not only have to come up with all of the things that make that other thing already great, but they also have to then do one better.
Right.
And they have to do it so fast that their competitor can't keep up, even though their competitor has every resource in the universe.
Yeah, they can't just do one better. They have to keep doing one better.
Yeah.
Right?
They have to always be ahead.
Because as soon as they go one ahead, then the player with all the players and all the money and everything is going to be like, well, that's our feature now.
Yep.
So then now you have to be like, well, we have this now. And then they'll be like, well, that's ours too. Yep. Be like, well, now we got this.
And so,
they take
all you then end up really doing is actually feeding ideas and improvements to your competitor. Because
if your competitor,
every idea you come up with just gets taken.
If the big player in the market has good DevOps, then I don't know how you would
You have to just
I don't know how you would unseat
I
that.
think you can't. Well, the only way you
have to
can do
come
it is
up
by
with some-
other means, like Epic being like, "We'll just buy these games."
You got to roll the wormhole. Like,
Yeah,
you,
you gotta roll the
need a
wormhole.
completely different strategy that goes outside of the boundaries.
You
of
actually
the
just,
game.
and I think that's the important thing is that people have been talking for a long time about all these things trying to compete with Steam, right? But they're always doing it on Steam's terms.
Yep.
That's the only way they've been doing it. And Epic was the first one to come out and just be like, "What if we just took it?
Yep.
What if we just said this is our game now? So is this one, and we just like kept on playing this game." But not just any random company can do that because you need to have an enormous war chest.
and a
of
huge
money.
player base already.
And a
present,
huge
'cause
player
No
base.
one wants to put their AAA game on a dead store.
Even if you pay them a lot of money.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Well, and there's that interesting problem of all these players who are outraged about like one specific game going to Epic or whatever. What they don't fully recognize is that by making infinite Reddit threads about it and by tweeting about it all the
They're
time,
just advertising the game.
all they're doing is advertising the game and letting more people know about the Epic store who never would have heard about it.
Yeah.
You know,
because actually
Like, you
that's
can't.
true.
What do you do?
That whole was it Metro
Exodus.
I'd never
'cause
heard
that.
that
Yeah,
game.
that's a series that I've never just really known much about
Yeah,
or
me
ever
either.
played. But I heard so much about it. I was like, people must fucking love this game. Like they're so angry about
Yeah.
this. So I still haven't bought it because I haven't played games actually in quite some time. But now it's actually one of the games it's just one of the games I think of
Yeah.
now, because of how angry people are about it. Which is really interesting. It's a counterproductive. I think we talked last week too about how a lot of that is just kind of a counterproductive strategy.
Yeah. Well, this is known as the Streisand Effect, which
Yeah.
is named after at some point some helicopter pilot was taking photographs
Aerial
photographs of celebrities' homes. Took a picture of Barbara Streisand's sort of like, I don't know,
Mansion.
cliffside mansion
Yeah.
or something. And she was so upset about it that she sued this photographer to like take this photo down and all this other stuff. And all these articles got written about it. And then of course in the articles, the photograph is there.
Yep.
And then the photograph is all of a sudden that's all anybody can talk about. And now instead of squelching it, she accidentally created.
Yeah, because of course nobody gave a fuck, right? There,
nobody cares about pictures of her house.
and those who did, it would have been in like whatever those magazines are. They're
They'd be like, look at this house.
exactly, and they'd make up some
It's
weird
big.
story about it or
Yeah.
whatever, and then the next week it'd be about aliens this time or whatever, and then people would just forget.
It would have just been a blip. Now there's an entire like
There's a Wikipedia
there's
article,
an entire Wikipedia article about this
and a
phenomenon.
and a South Park episode.
Yep.
Yeah, which is that like,
Was
well,
it Mecha Streisand?
Yeah,
There's
Mecha
a whole
Streisand.
Yeah.
it's kind of like we talk about in moderation, this idea between like muting or blocking. You know, if you block somebody who's a bad actor, all of a sudden they know that they're being blocked and they have all this motivation to like get around the block, and then you actually increase the amount of trouble that they're going to cause for you, right? So whereas a mute is basically just saying like, meh, I don't care about this. Like, I'm just not, you just keep doing whatever you want to do and I'm just going to move on with my life, right? And so that, of course, is literally the only way to deal with these kinds of things.
Well,
If
the
something
same deal
happens you don't like, just go.
Yeah,
the other
same
way.
deal with like hack prevention too, right? If somebody tries to hack something as a consequence, you like blow up all their data, or you block them forever, or you change the game in some way to harass them or whatever. You've now increased their incentive to like figure out how to do a better job of hacking you, right? If they actually just can't really tell if their hack worked or not,
Well, this is the
and
whole,
that's the outcome.
the opposite of love is not hate; it's indifference.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly
You
right.
just don't pay attention. You're like, no,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
because
even
love
know
and
you
hate are
exist.
both strong emotions.
Mhm.
Indifference is nothing.
nothing. You're gonna get nothing from me.
Well, this kind of comes back to our quote anti-piracy philosophy, right? Which is recognizing that there is
You
no
mean our
such
piracy indifference
thing.
philosophy?
Yeah, there is no such thing as anti-piracy. Like the harder you as a company try to like lock down your game, the more you just sort of like make pirates motivated to have it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then also
the
the-
higher you incentivize, because now all of a sudden, like the first person to crack a game gets all of the what I assume is piracy credit. I don't really know how all that works, but
they get piracy bucks that they
Piracy
can
bucks,
spend
yeah,
on
exactly.
Turns
growing.
out they're worth nothing.
Yeah.
but, you know, it's
Yeah. They get a lot of exposure bucks in the piracy community.
uh-huh.
Yeah. So for example, like with Crashlands, we made it so that when you start playing the game, we have all of our online features and stuff for cloud saving and all that, but you can just play the game.
Mhm.
You just have it and it's fine. And we actually get tons of messages from people who are like, "Hey, I pirated Crashlands. I loved it, and I'm sorry. And I went and I bought it. I just want to let you guys know that you converted me into a customer."
And it is, of course, far fewer players than pirated it and then didn't do that.
Yeah. The piracy rate's still 97%, but
it's very, very high still. But the fact is, like, that didn't really impact us, and especially because we were able to, through web features, basically like turn off access to certain parts of the content
that would cost us money.
That would actually cost us money, so that way we're not being harmed, and somebody still has an incentive to come actually truly buy the game.
And so we do the same thing in Levelhead, where we say like there's certain parts of the game that you can just play. You're not going to be able to get access to all of these advanced web features that cost us a bunch of money to run, but you can still do a bunch of stuff in the game.
You can still play the campaign. You can still make levels.
Yeah. And that's our way of saying, like,
you can't share them.
We get it. Everybody's got their reasons, maybe you can't buy right now. Maybe you just have a stance, or maybe you just want to try it and you don't really know. But any of those things could end up with you being like, you know what? I really do like this game and I do want to support the development. So, we put that in there.
Yeah. We'd of course prefer that you didn't.
Yeah.
But
also we get it.
Also, that's a thing we're not going to try to stop. That would be,
but again, that's one of those like leading up to launch things we have to put development time into, is making sure that we accommodate,
but we should still say that the fact of piracy still has to influence some of our design decisions. Because there's one big question. So with the game, like with Levelhead, you only really need to log in to share levels, like from a technical standpoint, right?
Yeah.
And there's no reason why technically you couldn't be downloading other people's levels without logging in. The problem is that because most of our users will be pirates, then all of a sudden our bandwidth costs of all the levels that we're now letting people download go up literally about
30 times,
30x, right?
Yeah, because if they go with a 97% piracy rate, then 1 in 30, basically.
So it actually becomes very expensive and actually untenable to allow people to download content without first passing some piracy check. And which is then kind of frustrating, because of course, like, I would prefer the user experience be like, you just can have whatever makes sense for you to have at the moment. And then once you like need to pass through that gate to like get the rest of it, then that would be fine. But we actually just kind of can't.
Yeah. So we're always having to put dev time into that, which does suck. But it's part of it. It's just part of it. It's just signed up for.
Well, it's actually just part of our constraints. Is kind of how we see it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get on to some questions. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. So if you'd like to get your question on a future episode or influence what questions we answer,
because you can upvote stuff over there.
Yeah, you can go there, ask questions, vote questions up, and then we'll talk about it. So first question comes from Rustmine22. Are any of you bilingual, or do any of you know 2 or more languages semi-fluently?
No, I guess is the short answer.
Well, we went to Uruguay, and Sam brokenly
My Spanish came out of nowhere, but I got it.
But semi-fluently, that seems like a stretch, probably.
No, I could get around.
Yeah, I can.
Well, how semi are we talking? Are we talking 0.06? Because
isn't semi just 0.5?
I had a weak conversation with like a cab driver and the woman at the bakery counter.
Yeah, I witnessed it.
Mm-hmm.
I witnessed it. It took me a while to figure out when they were asking us if we wanted water con gas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean? Because I was thinking like this has to mean something. It can't just mean with gas.
But it literally does, though.
But it's apparently people just drink
bubbly
carbonated water in a lot of places. And I didn't really know about that.
Water with gas. Very straightforward. Yeah.
Now, my wife speaks like 4 languages. She's from India.
She's really holding that end of your household down.
Yeah.
On average, you guys are doing great.
On average, my household speaks 2 languages per person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, because over in India, there's a lot of states, and those states were actually sort of like nations in and of themselves before the British showed up and did their whole shit that they always do.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so,
like, we'll just redraw this map for you.
Yeah. So,
do you a solid.
Yeah. So in a U.S. equivalent, it would be kind of like if Iowa spoke its own language, and then Minnesota spoke its own language, and then Nebraska had its own language, et cetera, et cetera. But then, of course, we're all part of the same country. So we still need
a national language.
Yeah, we still need a national language. But then it's also the case that like maybe for a while, because of other conquerings in the past, maybe like the northern half of the United States also has another language everybody speaks, and the southern half has a language everybody else speaks. So typically in India, you've got your state language, then you've got your regional language. So maybe it's like Hindi or Tamil or something. And then people tend to learn English as well, because all government stuff is done in English. So trilingual is like the minimum. And then people will often take another language just for funsies, at school and stuff.
And of course, if you're in Western Europe, where you can like move your physical body for about an hour,
Right.
and now you're surrounded by people who speak a different language.
You
Same
trip,
thing,
you
yeah.
trip on
Yeah,
a
same-
stick, and then all of a sudden you stand up and you're like, oh shit, I'm France now. And
Yep.
then now everybody's speaking French.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a little different in the U.S. and also because of the British over the years, English is everywhere,
Mhm.
and then because of sort of like American sort of capitalistic colonialism,
Mhm.
like sending all of our shit all over the place, people also learn English for business reasons everywhere. So unfortunately, the motivation is low.
Yeah, we get to get away with only knowing English, which is, I mean, embarrassing and not
is
good.
embarrassing,
But it is just it's just a fact of how the world kind of exists.
turned out.
currently.
It's one of those hidden privileges where we just don't need to take the time to learn
Yeah.
it because the rest of the world has kind of like come to us.
Yeah.
That's just how it is.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, guys.
because that lack of incentive is a real problem, right? Because and also like we here we are in St. Louis, right? And we very rarely even hear Spanish here because you hear a lot of Spanish in the U.S. sort of in general, but here it's actually not even. There's like little pockets of the city.
Pockets, or it depends where you go. Like if you're on the Del Mar Loop, for example, because you have this mix of like just tons of kids from the college are right next by, and it's a big international pull.
Yep.
And so if you walk down the street on the Loop, you
might hear a whole bunch.
You'll hear Arabic and then Chinese and then like just all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, depending on where you're at, then you might walk on. You're just only hearing.
Yeah,
English.
but since all those people are here for university education,
Mhm.
then they all speak English also, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like there's actually nowhere I can really go where I just can't just speak English, right?
Mhm.
And the few times I've tried to learn other languages, basically back in high school and then in
You went
college.
to Mexico for a while, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my wife and I went to Mexico. We took like a month-long like intensive Chinese or intensive Spanish course.
You also took Chinese.
I took Chinese at a different time, another intensive course. And at the time, like I learned so much, and I was like, I can actually like speak pretty well and all that kind of stuff. But then immediately after the course was done, like I didn't need to use it anymore.
Yeah, because you came
And then
back
it just falls away.
the northern U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that's always been kind of a perpetual bummer for me, which is that I really only know English. And then like I used to be able to get by in a couple other languages, but now definitely cannot because it's been so long.
I mean, I always want to learn Marathi, which is the language spoken in the home state of my wife in India, because all of her family speak Marathi all the time. They don't speak Hindi generally. Like they can, they just don't, because they're only. It's like how we say, well, we're in the northern United States. People tend to almost exclusively speak English around here.
Yep.
Or at least everybody does speak English. Mm-hmm. So that's just what you hear everywhere, right? So whenever I'm staying with her family, which is typically in Mumbai, which is a city of like 26 million people, everybody there just speaks Marathi, but that language only lives in that bubble of that small geographic area. And then once you go outside, it's completely gone. Right. So like, I would love to learn that so I could fluently converse with all the people in her
you
family.
only need it once every couple of years or whatever.
Every couple of years, I need it for like a week and a half.
Yeah.
And then once I leave, it's not that I have fewer options to use it. I just don't have any really, right?
Yep.
Except if I just spoke inside my own house in Marathi.
Yep.
So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's always about incentives and context. All right. Next question comes from Beekie Boppaboop. What is the latest problem you have? Can we knotted?
Huh.
The list for Levelhead is very long.
Oh God, what's the latest?
Well, let's talk about just even doing the early access launch was literally a can we not situation because of the fact that we heard Super Mario Maker was coming out in June.
We're like, well, we were gonna take this thing all the way to a full simultaneous release. What if we didn't though? What if?
Yeah.
Well, not only
can we
that,
not?
but all of the things that we have to postpone working on.
Yeah. So for example, like there are already a suite of items. There's a suite of power-ups that have been in the game for a while now. But because of all the work that we had to do to get the game, like all the stuff we just talked about, to get the game to a point where it would be launchable, we couldn't just keep on building content because it didn't make any sense. Because you need to test it.
We had to refine and test all the existing stuff.
Exactly. So we basically drew a line in the content to say we can get by.
We cannot launch with these things.
Exactly.
And they're almost ready, but not quite. We
just haven't been used enough.
Yeah.
Internally for us to be comfortable with it.
Yeah. So we'll sit on those for now and we'll get them out as quick as we can.
Yeah.
But again, and it's always that you always think that you need more than you do.
Definitely.
The list of required things for launch that we had like 2 weeks ago or whatever
It was about 200 and
was very
something
long.
items long.
And we just did as much of it as we could. And so apparently those are things that are not required for launch.
Yeah.
Because
that's the reality, right?
We've talked about when we launched Crashlands, we had 300 items in our workflow of like, these are things that have to go into the game.
Yep.
But, once we had $500 left in the bank, we were like, I guess not. I guess whatever happens, happens.
The reality is like when it seems like, I think this is one of those things about constraints or about deadlines, which is that when it seems like you have infinite time, you actually cannot tell what is really, really important.
Yeah.
You honestly can't.
Everything is top priority.
Everything seems like it's top priority.
And everything you do, I mean, it's fair to say like everything you do moves the game forward.
Yeah.
And I guess unless you break it, but generally, if you put a piece of work through your Trello board and you're like, yep, this is a new feature, new item, new interface tweak, we want to change, we want to upgrade the fonts, like make them a little sharper, whatever. Every single one of those things is fine. And you've advanced the game, but to what end? And when does it stop? Cause there's that saying like a game is never finished. You just stop working on it. Right. Cause you could always improve the game in some way. So having that sort of deadline all of a sudden thrust upon us was it was just a pure can we not. And actually I think we took like 200 something cards out of our Trello, put them into a Notion board of like game
just
design
ideas.
plans and stuff. We're like, these things are still not pinned down. We don't have a roadmap for them, and we've got them in our board and we want to do them, but we still don't know when. So it's just like, can we not deal with these at least right now?
And so probably most of this will actually just never end up in the game.
Yeah, but we're putting together a 1 month review cycle. We're saying like, all right, what are we going to focus on for the next month out of our ideas board and stuff. So it could be like, oh, this month is going to be all about editor features and editor improvements, or this next month is going to be about.
But the cool thing about this, mixing out the whole can we not thing with early access is that now we have this list of things that we think would be really cool and that we think are important, and we can rank in terms of how important we think they are. But now we actually can get community feedback on stuff. Where now if the community like really just kind of comes around a certain issue, so like maybe some aspect of how the editor works or something that like we know is kind of missing, but we thought this other thing was more important. Then now we actually can reprioritize based on what the community actually wants us to do.
Yeah, I'm so excited about that because so much of game dev when you're just in your cave is trying to guess what's important because you don't know. And so having the game actually in players' hands means that you just get to actually know in some ways.
Well, and we've had so many conversations around what we think people might get irrationally upset about.
Yes.
Like because every person has kind of like their idiosyncratic thing where they might feel slighted if a game is missing this certain feature or if a game does a thing a certain way. And we also know that when you put a feature in, if you don't deliver it sort of like up to standard, then it's actually worse than if you just didn't have that feature to begin with. So we're always kind of going back and forth leading up to the launch about like what really matters in terms of what's going to expose us to like quote harm by getting review bombed or whatever.
Just negative reactions from the player.
Because like it sucks for the player, but it actually sucks more for us.
Oh yeah,
right. Because like the player bought the game and then they're kind of like, oh, well, I don't like the fact that this is the way that it is.
Like for example, the keyboard thing from Alpha. It's like we put WASD and then J and K were your keys, which seemed like they made sense to us.
So you're kind of like almost on like the home row,
and
we got a weird number of people saying
really high gain responses from people who are like, I hate this.
But
I hate you and how dare you? Like we actually got that response.
But specifically what they said was like, I hate the fact that J is the grapple button. But they would never go into more detail. Like what button should it be?
Just not
J.
Yeah, what is it about this that makes you so angry?
What's the real because essentially it's sort of like a WASD spacebar, which is a very common thing. And then we thought, well, if you're playing just with the keyboard, then you probably want your other hand, in a comfortable, familiar place,
like on the home row,
where it normally is. So we'll just go index finger, middle finger, right? But no, that was a bad move for inexplicable reasons. So we added a second option, which is now you can play it with keyboard and mouse, with the mouse left and right buttons,
which I actually do prefer.
But actually, it feels really good.
It feels fantastic. But the interesting note is that had I played a game like that, like my response to that keybind control would not be so like intense, right? Where it's like because the basic feeling we got from some players was essentially a how dare you?
Yeah. Like some really sort of outrage sort of
and
vibes.
So that's one of the interesting things about just
but without explanation.
Without explanation, which is fine. But I think it's one of those things where as a dev, it's this really weird territory where like because
you don't know where all the landmines are.
Yeah,
you know?
And people, it's kind of like dealing with a wild animal. Like
Yeah,
sometimes,
like,
or maybe like you're petting a cat, and then like it just bites you for no reason at all.
and then it rolls back over and you rub it.
You're like, is this okay? Am I good now?
I think that's a good way to how the relationship kind of feels sometimes. You're like, I
the
love this.
Yeah. Like you love the whole experience of like owning a cat, and the cat seems to love you most of the time.
Sometimes it just bites.
Every now and then you get wounded, you know. You got to kind of navigate that.
Yeah, well, it's always for stuff because like you just pet it a little too long, but not under any metric of too long specifically. Just like
Just that
in
moment,
that moment,
that was too long.
Yeah,
yeah. Actually, that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's a good metaphor.
Pretty good metaphor. Yeah, and also I feel like early access. I mean, I have to say this. I feel like it's cheating.
Yeah, I feel like it too.
Because here's the thing: when you launch a game into like a full 1.0 launch, you get reviewed by all the review sites, and they just like that is the review now.
Yep.
On launch day, your game gets reviewed, and the reviewers are like 70% or 50%.
Yeah, that's just how good your game is for the rest
And
of the time,
that
no matter
is
what
now
you do.
Locked in. You go to Metacritic, nobody ever comes back a year later and they're like, never mind, scrap that old review. It's really good now, 100%. Right?
Happen.
Never happens. And so, like, for example, if you look at our PC reviews from Crashlands, PC reviewers were like, this doesn't have controller support. This doesn't have a lot of the features that we would want. We added controller support. Nobody changed their review.
No.
Right?
No.
So, but in early access, nobody reviews it because it's, not done. I'm putting that in air quotes. It's not done yet, even though like it's fully playable. It has all this great content. You can put hundreds of hours into it already.
Well, it's a comical framing thing, though, too, because most launched games now get so many continuous updates post-launch that they're also not done at launch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole thing is basically imaginary.
The whole thing's imaginary. And so we feel like we after we started going down the early access process, we started looking into this more, and we're like, this can't be real. That you basically could just be like, you can start selling the game and just continue working on it, right? And it's a fully finished product, it's ready to go, but you can now legitimately and genuinely take player feedback and improve your game, and people won't review it until you just arbitrarily go.
And
all
by
right,
people,
now,
you mean like the press?
The press. Until you just go, okay, now review it.
We're ready.
We're ready, and then you can keep updating it after that too.
And then they won't come back and do it after that.
Yeah. So I think about a game like, RimWorld, which was in early access for years and years, Kerbal Space Program as well.
Yep.
And you just don't see any professional reviews of the game until the moment they're like, now that we've been working on this game for 6 years or 7 years.
In the open market,
continuously getting feedback.
Huge
from
numbers
players.
of sales, in fact.
Yeah, getting feedback from players, improving the game in every possible way that players wanted. Okay, now, how good is it? Tell us how good it is, right?
Yeah.
And at that point, I feel like, it feels like it's cheating.
But it's awesome because I think the reality is
I love it.
So the reality is that it puts the framing really in the correct spot, which is products have moved in the last 10 years from being these things that just arrived and that was it to being things that are constantly worked on. Like literally every single service you use operates under the same thing now.
So the idea of like, if today somebody reviewed like Netflix just as a thing,
Versus back when it was CDs in the mail.
Yeah,
exactly.
Or I guess DVDs in the mail.
Yeah. In both cases, those reviews are wholly inappropriate. Right. Because like all that they'll tell you is how good it is based on that person's biases and beliefs right
in
now.
that moment.
But it's also important that because this is the games as a service idea, right? Which is that if you are going to be updating your game, if you have plans for updating your game, you are doing a games as a service thing. It's just actually true, right?
Yeah, they might just have sort of like an end of the games as a service phase where you just say, okay, now this is
final
like,
one.
There's a final patch or whatever.
And so, but it's interesting because I think that framing helps so much because it actually lines the player community up with where we're actually at.
Yep.
Which is we're interested in literally building this and continuously building this thing to make it better based on your feedback. It's not like I just shoot it out and then walk away sort of thing.
And now we just have to worry less about somebody arbitrarily sort of like stepping into that middle of that process and being like, boom, locked in.
Yeah.
This is how everybody's going to think about your game from this point forward.
Yeah, so it's super interesting. And I think players seem to approach it a little bit more like that too, though plenty of people don't even know that early access is a thing, despite all the warnings that are on like the Steam page and stuff. They'll just get it.
Yeah. Well, so it creates a better relationship between us and the players.
Yeah.
Because they're saying like, yeah, I know you guys are going to keep working on this game. So here's my feedback. Like, but I love it and it's great and we'll keep going. Right. And then they'll see more content coming out and it's all gravy. It's all good. So our next question comes from Zooslap Wumpywippy.
That's a good one.
That's very good.
By the way, for people who are new to the podcast, you can go when you create your Rumpus account.
Yeah.
There's a little account management thing, and you can hit some dice, and we've got this random.
Well,
name
by default, you just get a random user alias.
Yeah. So this might be one of those. But yeah, we
Well,
got.
you can go change it, and there's a little dice roller that you can go
So
select.
I think both Beekie Boppaboop and Zooslap Wumpywippy are some of our on point randomly generated names.
Those are good ones.
Zooslap Wumpywippy says, you've previously mentioned that one of the things that differentiates Levelhead is the package system, throwing it about, trying to bring it with you, and grappling about the place. These both certainly sound great, but what's the best way of showing potential audiences how great they actually are? How do you go about marketing mechanics?
Well, that one you do not.
You don't market mechanics.
So the reason is, in this case, is that you have to make sure you understand what's the hook about your game. The hook about a platformer being that you carry a package around is not a hook.
Cares.
No one gives a
Once you
gives a damn.
experience it, you're like, oh.
Yes. So and it's really, you got to make sure you hone in on those things that are the difference between something that someone literally has to experience in order to understand how good it is versus something that someone can just sort of grok by looking at it. They just see it and they're like, oh.
I think a good example. So when you market, you're marketing feelings. You're not marketing.
You're marketing.
You're not marketing like logic or explanations, right? Because people tend to react to things emotionally and then they act on the emotion that came about. So,
but also you can't people can't understand a thing without full context, which means they can't understand it until they already have it.
Well,
And
no, I don't think
can't
that's
just
true.
explain it
Because people don't buy things based on their understanding. They buy things based on their feelings.
Yeah, no, I'm saying
So-
even if you could,
Oh yeah.
there's no way to explain it anyway in a way you can understand,
Right.
which means that the whole explanation based approach just cannot work.
Right. So think about a game like Portal. So Portal appears to be marketed on its mechanics in the sense that it's a puzzle game.
Now you're thinking with portals.
Yeah, it's a first person puzzle game and it's all about like you go through this portal and you come out the other side, right? But the implications of that in a puzzling context don't really become clear until you're actually interacting with the puzzles.
And the most incredible ways to use it do not become clear until
much later.
6-7 hours into the game.
So like what is it then that you sell with that? And it's literally just this visual of like shooting a portal in one place,
And seeing
shooting it
something
in the
on
other,
the other side,
and then like seeing through the portal.
Yeah, that
and
is
then just
sufficient.
and then walking through it like a door.
or like the infinite following thing.
Yeah.
Right?
yeah.
So you basically you need to find these moments about your game that are somehow basically the emotional beats that are captured inside of whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
And so in our case with Levelhead, what we've actually focused on is a combination of sort of the intensity of the play experience, or on the creator side, we basically try to pick, like basically we made a new trailer that's coming out for the early access release. And so what you'll see in that one is it does show off the creator actually much more than the previous one did.
Actually starts with that.
It starts with that. But the question was, how do you do that in such a way where people can understand what's happening? Because it's like moving stuff, it's moving blocks around.
It would be like if you made a trailer for Photoshop or something. It's like there's a lot of tools and a lot of things on the
so
screen.
The vibe we're trying to then get people to walk away with is the idea that they could do anything.
Yeah. And so the question is, what of these like bajillion elements that we built into the game somehow are easily understood at a glance and are impressive to be understood at a glance, right? And so it's stuff like the things that the really good part about that is we've demoed the game enough and pitched it to enough people that we've seen the things that make people go, ooh. And that's what you need. Whatever those are, like that's essentially how you build your marketing around it. So in our case, it was the scale popping of spikes and then the terrain turning into different stuff as you build with it. And then some of the properties being modified on things like spike chains where they get bigger, big, like really big spikes that start swirling around. So
because what you want to do is you want to like give people enough that they kind of feel inspired or interested in it, and then you want to sort of leave enough open that there's curiosity kind of lingering, so people start to imagine like, wow, what else can I do? You know? But yeah, so as far as and if you think back look back at our Crashlands trailer, I mean that thing was it wasn't an explanation trailer.
Yeah, well, so actually we went away from the spoken stuff with these last two trailers because, and specifically, I wanted to try hitting those emotional beats harder, because it just seemed like what essentially happens when you have a lot of that text in there is that you're going to fall into more of an explanatory mode because you can, right? And so we wanted to take that out and just see, like, can we make something that actually hits, that's a trailer that still hits really hard, but that actually delivers along these emotional beats without saying a word, which is the goal. Yeah,
because otherwise, the more we say, the more people focus on
the words,
what it is that we're saying. You know,
also you have to translate them.
There's that makes it a very English only kind of experience. Yeah, so there's a lot to that. All right, let's get to one last quick question, which is from Brainroosta Jumpywoo. When the dust settles after the release of Levelhead, do you have any plans to reward yourselves with a holiday or some in-house R&R time?
Yes.
You have plans or just an intent?
I got plans. So my wife and I just happened to. Wasn't on purpose, but it just happened
Make
to.
sure you don't mention any timelines while you're talking about.
Well, it's in May, so it's
Okay,
after
okay.
After April.
Yeah, it's after April. But yeah, in May we're going to San Diego for a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
So this will be our third ever trip, just as a duo, which is super fun. 7 years we've been together. So I got that, and then we had briefly talked about we're doing a dinner with the team, and then we're gonna plan a little togetherness day, kind of like when we did back in December, I think, where we bought Deep Rock Galactic. The whole crew.
Yeah.
Brought some booze in, and then we worked for a couple hours in the morning, just kind of everybody's cleaning stuff up, and then around like 11:30,
Bust out the booze.
bust out the dwarves, and then we just like went Deep Rock Galactic mining.
Just
It was
mined
awesome.
and murdered.
It was
bugs.
so fun.
It was like 6 hours, I think we
played
that.
too long.
Again, another early access game. Great.
It is good.
If you're looking
But
for
it's-
something to tide you over till Levelhead, maybe try it.
But its UIs are very ugly. At least the main menu one.
Yeah.
Still,
Well, that was very inspirational for us because
it was. Yeah, we played it. We were like, well, I guess we could do whatever we want.
we're like, this game is great, and yes, the UIs are terrible, and yes, many of the progression systems are clearly out of whack.
Mhm.
You know, they'd be like,
yes, there aren't very many enemies. It turns out you see them all in the first.
yeah, it's
10
like
minutes.
you put in like 2 hours of gameplay and you earn this currency or whatever, and they're like, here's 1% boost to your run speed. And you're
Yeah,
like, well,
the
was
upgrades
clearly-
are so disappointing.
but it was still good enough that we had a
Yeah,
great,
still
great
blessed.
afternoon with it.
I
So.
mean, yeah, the fucking drill arms, you know?
Oh
Where-
yeah,
You
yeah.
got
Adam was
drill
the drill
arms.
arm guy.
Yeah, he just like everybody else is like trying to like pick a way through.
Wait, what were we?
We're
So
like,
you were the
Adam!
drill arm guy.
Yeah.
What did you?
I was the scout, so I
you were
had
grappling
I had
around?
the flare gun and the grappling.
Yeah, and then
cable.
Sure had the platforms that he was shooting all over the
yeah.
place.
Yep.
What was it? I was just the gunner.
Yeah, like the heavy.
So, but I had the zip line.
Yeah.
So you could let the team go places, and I could just zip places at
Mhm.
will,
Yeah.
Unlimited.
Yeah.
So I could scout ahead. And
Yeah, and if we're trying to figure out, like,
places.
if we're trying to find eggs and stuff, then I'd just like get over and just start drilling. Because like, and you
He'd be like,
basically
Adam, there's an egg through this wall. He's like, "Brrr," he just gets his drills. And just
it's
starts,
hilarious. And then even like, because at the very end, you have to get back to a rocket, you know,
Mhm.
which can be pretty far away, and it's like through this convoluted maze. So we
Sometimes-
we would just burrow to it.
We'd be like, Adam, go! He's like,
Adam,
"Rah!"
that way.
And then, of course, you bust open into a tunnel, and there's just like a billion bugs there. We're
Yep.
like, oh,
This
shit.
was a mistake.
Yep. Yeah, that's
Yeah, that's
really
a good
fun.
game. So we'll probably do something. We may also try to do some R&R right before the launch, just because
It's
soon as
it's
it-
gonna be a busy time.
as soon as it comes out,
we want to be ready. I think we're all hoping that it'll go like the alpha did, which is smooth.
Yeah, we hope that we all plan to be here, and then we're all here, and then we just like hang out and like chat with players, and
It's not a big deal.
I mean, it's not a big deal.
I'm dubious, but
I mean, we're
I don't think that's what's going to happen, but it also all depends on the level of success, right? Because if only the number of people who play this game, who buy the game in early access in the first few days is the same as who played it in the alpha by number, right? Then it's going to be the same.
Yeah.
But if it blows up the way that we hope it does, like the more success we get out of this thing,
it's going to be
the
orders of
rougher-
magnitude bigger than the alpha, even if it's a low success.
yeah. Well, but the higher that gets, the rougher our weekend gets basically
Probably,
after launch.
yeah. So we have set aside time for the post-launch weekend and all that
Mhm.
stuff, but there's it'll be a lot.
Yeah, and we don't know because we haven't tested the impact of scale, but that all depends on the actual scale.
Yep.
So like my webs, all of Rumpus supposedly can auto scale to compensate for really high usage,
But can it?
But it's literally never had to, right?
Yep.
So
Get ready.
what's gonna happen?
Maybe we should.
Might look at that.
Well, no, there's nothing we can do about it because that was one of the things on our list of like,
Oh, yeah.
here's the thing we absolutely have to do before launch. And at some point we're just like,
We can't.
nah.
We're like, well, hope that works out.
Yeah, we just hope it works
Yeah.
out.
So, all right. Well, I hope that works out.
Me too.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Jen Coster, for making things sound good and run smoothly. Thanks to the community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we've got merch, links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.